She didn't need to touch me to change everything. Sometimes, a single presence can turn an ordinary night into something you never stop feeling. I remember that night for its stillness. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels alive, like the air itself was listening. A few of us had gathered at Jonah's apartment. Soft lights, quiet music, people talking in low voices, trying to sound more interested than they actually were. I didn't expect anything from the evening. I came because I had nothing better to do. Then I saw her. She was sitting near the window, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand, her posture effortlessly calm, like she didn't need to belong to the room to own it. The city lights behind her painted faint lines across her hair, turning it into something the night seemed to protect. She wasn't loud, wasn't trying to draw attention, and yet every conversation seemed to pause when she spoke. Her laugh, low, soft, touched by something mature, drifted through the noise like a familiar melody you can't quite place. There was something about the way she carried silence, how she seemed to wear it like silk, comfortable in it, unbothered by time. When Jonah introduced us, she turned her head and looked at me. Really looked. "Nice to finally meet you," she said. Her voice had warmth, but also this quiet gravity that made me forget the room around us. She was older, not by decades, but enough that I felt it. Not in the way she looked. She was stunning, graceful, but in her composure. The kind that comes from having lived, from knowing how fleeting and fragile people's attention can be. We only spoke for a few minutes at first. Polite questions, simple answers. But every time she smiled, something in me wanted to stay in that conversation a little longer. Later, I found myself near the same window she'd claimed earlier, pretending to look at the skyline just to stand where she had. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, soft, floral, like jasmine left in warm air. When she joined me again, it felt unplanned but meant to be. "Not much of a party person, are you?" she asked. I smiled. "Not really. You?" She gave a small shrug, the corner of her mouth curling. "Depends on the company." There was no flirtation in her tone, not yet. Just curiosity, calm and unhurried. Still, it landed somewhere deep. The conversation stretched on books, travel, the comfort of quiet places. I told her I liked people who didn't rush to fill silences. She just looked at me and said softly, "Then maybe you like nights like this." Something about that moment, the way her voice folded into the hum of distant traffic, made it feel infinite. That was the first evening I met her. The night wasn't special because of where we were or what we said. It was special because somehow she made time slow down, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't want it to move at all. Most people had already left by the time our talk began to really mean something. The night had thinned out, laughter replaced by soft music, the clink of glasses fading into the background. She was in the kitchen, rinsing her cup, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly undone. The effortless kind of beauty that doesn't demand attention, but quietly earns it. I found myself there too, pretending to help clean up, though I think we both knew I just wanted to stay near her. "Tea or wine?" she asked, turning to me with that calm half-smile. "Tea," I said. "Too late for anything stronger." She nodded approvingly. "Good answer." Most people try to impress by pretending they can handle more than they should. I watched as she filled the kettle, her movements unhurried. Steam began to rise, soft and white against the dim light. Her hands, slender, steady, rested on the counter as she waited. There was something in her silence, in the way she stood there, that made me want to say something meaningful. Anything, really, to earn another look from her. We talked about nothing, work, late nights, how the city feels different when everyone else is asleep. But every word felt heavier than small talk should. She asked questions that didn't sound rehearsed. She listened the way most people don't, like she was actually searching for something in my answers. When she laughed, her eyes softened, lines forming gently at their corners, not flaws, but signs of a life fully lived. She noticed me noticing and shook her head, amused. "What?" I asked. "You look at people too carefully," she said. "That's rare and a little dangerous." "Dangerous how?" She smiled. "Because when you look like that, people start wanting to be seen." Her words stayed with me. echoing louder than they should have. She poured the tea and handed me a cup. Our fingers brushed for just a second, a small, accidental thing, but enough to send a quiet spark through the space between us. The warmth of the cup, the faint scent of mint, it all blurred together until the only thing I could focus on was her presence. "I should go soon," she said softly, glancing toward the window. "It's late." "Yeah," I replied, though I didn't move. There was a pause, long, comfortable, almost fragile. Then she looked at me, really looked, and said, "It's nice, isn't it? Talking when no one's rushing to be somewhere else." I nodded, unable to find the right words. "Yeah," I whispered. "It feels real." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that doesn't need to be big to be unforgettable. When she finally left, the kitchen felt too quiet. Her teacup sat beside mine, a faint trace of her lipstick on the rim. I should have washed it, but I didn't, because somehow that tiny, ordinary moment, a late conversation, a shared cup of tea, had become the night I couldn't stop replaying in my mind. It had been a week since that night, but her presence hadn't left me. Every time I made tea, I thought of her hands wrapping around that cup. Every time the city went quiet, I heard her voice, that low, unhurried calm that made words feel like something sacred. I told myself it was nothing, just one good conversation. But some people don't fade easily. They stay in the corners of your mind, filling the silence with what-ifs. It was a rainy Thursday when I saw her again. I had ducked into a small bookstore cafe near the edge of town, one of those places that smells like old paper and roasted coffee beans. The kind of quiet that feels like a secret. I was flipping through a poetry book when I heard her voice. Soft, familiar, unmistakable. "Didn't expect to see you here." I turned, and there she was, umbrella still dripping near the door, a strand of hair sticking to her cheek. She brushed it away, smiling. "Guess I have good timing," I said. "Or bad," she teased gently, "depending on how much you value your solitude." We sat together without deciding to. Just two people seeking shelter from the rain, though both of us knew it wasn't really about the weather. The world outside blurred behind fogged windows. Inside, it was warm, still almost too intimate. She ordered black coffee. I stayed with tea. She remembered. "You're consistent," she said, glancing at my cup. "And you?" I asked. She shrugged, a faint smile touching her lips. "Still trying to be." For a while we just talked. About books, about the kind of loneliness that doesn't always feel sad, about how rain makes everything look softer. She spoke about her past, not in detail, but enough for me to sense the quiet ache beneath her composure. A long relationship that had taught her patience and caution. "I used to think I wanted wild love," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Now I just want something that feels honest." The way she said it made my chest tighten. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I wasn't sure what I was looking for either, only that being around her made the search feel less aimless. Our hands rested on the table, inches apart, close enough that if I shifted slightly, our fingers might have brushed. But neither of us moved. The silence between us was its own language, fragile, necessary, unspoken. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle. She glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should go before it stops completely. I like walking in the last bit of rain." I nodded, watching her rise, watching the way she pulled her coat close around her, like she was wrapping herself in quiet strength. Before she left, she turned to me once more. "It was good to see you again," she said, her voice almost a whisper. I wanted to ask if I'd see her again, but I didn't. I just watched her walk away, her silhouette blurring through the glass. And for a moment, the whole cafe felt like it was holding its breath. The rain stopped soon after, but somehow the world still smelled like her. It was late when she called. I remember the sound of her voice, soft, uncertain, as though she wasn't sure she should have dialed. "Are you busy?" she asked. I wasn't. "Good," she said after a pause. "Come for a walk. I don't feel like being home tonight." I met her near the waterfront, where the city thinned out and the river caught the reflections of streetlights like tiny, trembling stars. The air was cool, the kind that carries the scent of rain even when it hasn't fallen. She was waiting by the railing, hands in her pockets, her hair loose and wild in the breeze. There was something unguarded about her that night, a softness I hadn't seen before. Couldn't sleep? I asked. Didn't want to, she said simply. Then, with a small smile, besides, I thought you might understand. We started walking. No destination, just footsteps echoing on damp pavement. The world felt half asleep, like it belonged only to us. She told me about her old neighborhood, how she used to walk for hours when her mind felt too loud. How's your mind tonight? I asked gently. She laughed under her breath, loud enough to need company. I didn't press her. Instead, I matched her pace, listening to the soft rhythm of our steps, the faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional whisper of wind. Every so often, her shoulder brushed mine, light, fleeting, but each touch felt deliberate, grounding. After a while, she stopped near a bench under a street lamp. Do you ever think about what it means to start over? She asked. All the time, I said, but I don't think it ever feels new. Just different. She looked at me then, really looked, her expression unreadable. I used to believe in things that burn bright, she said quietly. Now I just want something that lasts. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't trying to burn. I just wanted to stay close enough to see her light. But the words felt too heavy for the moment. Instead, I sat beside her. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full living. Her scarf brushed against my sleeve. I could feel the faint warmth of her body beside mine. When she exhaled, it sounded almost like a sigh of relief. I didn't think I'd feel this comfortable again, she whispered. I turned to her, our eyes meeting, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that one shared look. She smiled faintly, her voice barely audible. You make the night feel easier. I wanted to answer, but all I could do was smile back. We stayed there until the street lights flickered off, the first hint of dawn creeping into the sky. And as we stood to leave, she slipped her hand into mine, just for a moment, long enough to make me forget that the night was ever meant to end. After that night, things changed, not outwardly, not in any obvious way, but underneath everything. Our conversations had always flowed easily, but now there was a tension between the words, a pause where something unnamed lived. And then, suddenly she was gone. A week passed, then two. No messages, no late-night calls. At first, I told myself she was just busy, but deep down I knew better. It's strange how silence can feel so loud. Every evening felt heavier without her voice breaking the quiet. I catch myself checking my phone, scrolling through old messages that weren't even romantic, just fragments of her, little proofs that she'd once been there. I try to let her go, to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined the closeness, that maybe it had been one-sided. But one night my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. Hey, I said, try not to sound too relieved. There was a long pause before she answered. Hi, she whispered. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Tired, maybe even a little scared. We talked quietly, like we were afraid of waking something fragile. She told me she'd been thinking, that she needed space, that what we had, whatever it was, scared her. I don't want to hurt you, she said, and I don't want to be that person who takes more than she can give. Her honesty cut deeper than any rejection could have. I didn't try to convince her otherwise. I just listened because I understood, maybe too well. You're not taking anything, I said quietly. You're just here, and I like that. She didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we couldn't say. I worry, she finally murmured, that people would look at us and not understand. Then let them not understand, I said. She gave a quiet, pained laugh. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is, I replied, even though I knew it wasn't. I could hear her breathing on the other end, slow, measured, like she was trying to calm herself. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, You make me feel things I promised myself I wouldn't feel again. There was no reply that felt right. I just closed my eyes, letting her words settle somewhere deep. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, staring at the empty dark of my room. She hadn't said goodbye, but she hadn't said stay either. And yet, something in her voice told me this wasn't the end. It was hesitation, not distance. Fear, not indifference. And somehow I knew she'd call again. Not soon, maybe, but she would. Because the kind of connection we had doesn't fade. It lingers like a quiet pulse, waiting for the courage to beat again. It happened quietly, as most honest things do. A few weeks had passed since our last call, long enough for me to start believing that she'd chosen distance for good. Then one evening, just as the sun slipped beneath the skyline, I saw her again. It wasn't planned. I'd stopped by the small park near the waterfront, the same place we'd walked that night, and there she was sitting on the same bench, hands clasped together, staring out at the fading light. For a moment, I thought about walking away, pretending not to see her. But something in the curve of her shoulders stopped me, a kind of quiet exhaustion that didn't look like peace. When she turned and saw me, she smiled, small, hesitant but real. "I was hoping I'd run into you," she said, her voice softer than the breeze. "Were you?" I asked. She nodded, eyes drifting back toward the river. "I think I owe you a conversation." I sat beside her, not too close, not too far. The air between us was fragile, like one wrong word could shatter it. She spoke first. "I've been trying to make sense of whatever this is," she said. "You make me feel comfortable, and that scares me." I told myself I was too old for uncertainty, too settled for the kind of hope you bring. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, to her words, to the quiet tremor in them, to the way her fingers twisted together like she was holding herself in place. "I thought if I disappeared," she continued, "maybe it would fade. But it didn't. It just made me realize how much space you take up when you're gone." I turned to her then. "You could have called." "I know," she whispered. "I wanted to. 100 times." The sky deepened into twilight. The first street light flickered on above us, casting a soft glow across her face. She looked at me, not searching, not questioning, just looking like she finally allowed herself to. "I don't know what to call this," she said, her voice trembling. "I just know I don't want to keep pretending it doesn't matter." I reached for her hand, slow, deliberate, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. She didn't. Her fingers slipped between mine, cool at first, then warm. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sound of the river filled the silence, steady and low. "I think about you too," I said finally. "More than I should. And not because it's easy, but because it's real." Her eyes softened, glimmering under the streetlight. Then she leaned against me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder, her voice barely a breath. "Then let's just stop running from it," she murmured. I didn't move, didn't answer. I just held that moment, her weight against me, the scent of her hair, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, and thought, this is what truth feels like. We didn't plan to stay out that long. It just happened, the way certain moments do when neither of you wants to break them. One conversation bled into another until time stopped matching. The park was nearly empty, the world hushed beneath the soft hum of distant traffic. The river shimmered faintly under the streetlights, and the air held that stillness that only exists in the middle of the night, fragile, infinite. She sat close to me, her shoulder brushing mine every so often. No words, no tension, just quiet presence, the kind that speaks louder than anything else. For the first time, I noticed how tired she looked, not weary, but peaceful, like she'd stopped fighting some invisible battle inside her. "I used to hate nights like this," she said softly. "They always reminded me of what I was missing. And now?" I asked. She smiled faintly, eyes glinting in the faint light. "Now, they remind me I can still feel something." There was something about the way she said it, calm, unafraid, that made me realize this wasn't a temporary connection. This was something that had changed us both quietly, almost without permission. She turned slightly, studying me with that same patient gaze she had the first night we met. "You know," she said, "I try to convince myself you were just a phase, something brief, but you stayed, even when I pushed." I shook my head gently. I didn't stay because it was easy. I stayed because it felt right. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, then closed again. Instead, she reached out, slow, almost shy, and let her fingers rest over mine. Her touch wasn't searching this time. It was steady, certain. We talked for hours, about small things, old regrets, quiet hopes. She told me about her favorite places as a child, The music she listened to when she couldn't sleep, the poems she still remembered by heart. I told her about the dreams I hadn't dared to chase yet. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the distance between us dissolved completely. As the night gave way to dawn, a faint light began to stretch across the sky. The air turned cooler, softer. She leaned her head against my shoulder again, and I could feel her smile. Small, content, real. "You make the night feel endless," she whispered. I looked at her, the pale morning light brushing across her face, and said quietly, "Only because you were in it." For a long time, we just sat there, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across the river. No promises, no expectations. Just two people who had stopped pretending not to care. And as the city woke around us, I realized something simple but certain. It wasn't about the night being endless. It was about how she made every moment feel like it could last forever.